Originally released in the arcades, Soul Blade eventually landed on the PS1 and brought the full arcade experience to the home. Everything was here, each character, stage, move and weapon made the transition and proved that the PlayStation was not only capable but could excel when it came to arcade ports. The most impressive aspect has to be the animation of each fighter. It's all incredibly smooth, resulting in each fight looking and feeling realistic for its time. The subtle use of various particle effects burst to life on the screen. It really added a real weight to each action and managed to amp up the intensity of each encounter. As with most fighting games, a wide array of stages were included, which all looked stunning during play. Many dynamic aspects to each of them helped them stood out, such as reflections, weather effects, and even swaying platforms that altered the gameplay. From the open fields to the more impressive temples, there was a huge amount of diversity with each. By no means is it the best fighter on the system, but one that still manages to hold up. The biggest change between the original and Dino Crisis 2 had to be the way the sequel ditched the fully 3D environments for the pre-rendered backgrounds many have become accustomed to with Resident Evil. I for one think it was the right choice, as a lot more detail is now packed into each area, making each location feel like a much more believable space. The backgrounds simply look stunning and are different from the classic Resident Evil style. There are jungles, cities, cornfields and silos that all adds up to a stack of variation. Character models have had a facelift as well, with Regina and Dylan looking a lot more lifelike, and the new motion capture technique made the movement of them a lot more fluid. The dinosaurs of course steal the show. They are all modelled brilliantly and are far more reminiscent of the ones that featured in Jurassic Park. Because of this, they are a lot more daunting and really ramp up the scare factor when it comes to encountering even the smallest of enemies. Much like the original and many other games on the PS1, a range of FMV sequences fill the story throughout the adventure. They look absolutely mind-blowing in motion and even rival the likes of Final Fantasy when it comes to complexity. Although some of the gameplay changes might put some people off, to me Dino Crisis 2 stands as the best in the series. The Wipeout series has always been a bit of a showcase for the PlayStation console. Wipeout 3's design is simply impeccable. Little details look slick, visually impressive and eye-catching due to the flashy and futuristic touches. The vehicles themselves look fast and sleek, which never often stray from the normal impression of what a future racer should look like. And although there's only 8 ships in the game, each looks strikingly different from the others to produce a unique identity for each. But Wipeout 3's most alluring feature, and one that is a truly awesome thing to see, is the ability to render extremely high speeds. When you run over speed pads and hyper boost ahead of the competition, things begin to move proportionally as fast. Assuming that you can control it, you hurtle through the level whilst the visuals continue as if nothing is out of the ordinary. The usual slowdown and associated going too fast problems are completely absent here. Instead, you're left with what a racer should be like when travelling faster than you're prepared to handle. Wipeout 3 on the PlayStation is a crowning achievement of what was possible on the console. If you're a racing fan, this game is a must. After the huge success of the first game, it was only a matter of time before we got another entry in the Driver series. The sequel was a lot more ambitious with what it was trying to achieve, and this time around it was possible to actually get out of your car and traverse the city on foot, which added a completely new dimension to the gameplay. Visually, Driver 2 managed to maintain the quality that was introduced with the first iteration and built upon it in many meaningful ways. There were several cities to explore, such as Rio, Las Vegas and Chicago, that all possessed their own unique traits such as casinos and neon lights to help portray each location as authentically as possible. Another inclusion was the day to night cycle and weather systems that dynamically affected not only the way the game looks, but also how it played. During rainfall, the gameplay would become somewhat harder, only adding to the realism of the experience. Of course, there was a ton of new vehicles such as fire trucks, buses and various cars that also made the cut. And just like the original, they were all completely destructible as well. It's not all perfect though, as there's a heavy amount of pop-in that can occur, as well as bouts of slowdown, but it's never anything that fully ruins the experience. In all honesty, Driver 2 is a must-have and deserves a spot in any PS1 collection. When you think of polyphony digital, your mind is no doubt going to wander straight to the likes of Gran Turismo. They produced a somewhat overlooked shooter known as Omega Boost. Seeing as how this game is from the makers of Gran Turismo, it's no surprise that the visuals would be pushed to the limit on the PlayStation 1. Amazing trail and particle effects are used for many aspects. Reflective surfaces cover the mechs and enemies, enormous and beautiful explosions erupt every time you take out a boss. Of course, there are some problems. There can be a bit of clipping once in a while, but the game's so fast that it's hardly noticeable. But the backgrounds can be quite bad at some times as well. For example, there's not much to them. On one level, there's just a ground below, a dark sky above, and a bit of rain in between. It's not that much to look at, but again, this isn't much of a problem when the game gets moving. Although the fast-paced action and somewhat wild camera may turn some players away, there's no denying that Omega Boost looks absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. Ace Combat 3 is no doubt one of the best looking games on the PlayStation 1. It was a huge improvement over the previous entry and introduced many new touches that helped elevate it above anything else in the genre. The first and most obvious aspect are the planes themselves that all look lovingly detailed and crafted, even right down to subtle features like wing flaps that fold out whilst braking. Add to this the weapon effects that were surprisingly realistic for the time, with smoke trails being left behind rockets as they curl through the air, and the explosions that fill the screen as you successfully take down an enemy. It all looks stunning in motion, and to top it all off, the detail and size of each map was immense. Some of them took a few minutes to fly at full speed from one side to the other, with numerous cities with buildings and bridges, to more rural locations such as the countryside and caverns that all added a distinct flavour to each mission. Although the draw distance did slightly let it down, when considering how old the game is, it was still a sight to behold and stands as a testament to the talent of the team behind it. If you're fond of aerial combat, Ace Combat 3 is a solid choice. After the huge success of both the first and second entries in the franchise, there was no doubt that Resident Evil 3 would be another solid entry in the series. It once again took place in Raccoon City, but this time around saw players taking on the role of Jill Valentine as she fights to escape the city whilst avoiding a grotesque monster known as the Nemesis. The biggest difference between this and the second entry is that a lot more of the action takes place outside, with the player not constantly being confined to the police station. Because of this, you got to explore a lot more of the city, and this is where the visuals steal the show. The clarity and stark dramatic angling of the crumbling pre-rendered structures really added a whole new layer to each environment, from burst fire hydrants drenching a street to random fires raging in abandoned cars and debris littered as far as the eye could see. It was a huge step up when compared to Resident Evil 2 and really pushed the hardware. But if there was one word that could sum it up, it has to be variety. Each zombie was now a lot more unique, with varying designs instead of the classic black shirt and jeans zombie showing up over and over again. In true Resident Evil fashion, a range of FMV sequences were included as well that all received an upgrade. Far more detail was packed into each of them, making them a real highlight throughout the adventure. Although I still prefer RE2, there is no denying the third installment is still an impressive entry. The most striking aspect of Mega Man Legends has to be its visual style. It takes on a somewhat simple cel-shaded appearance that at first can look quite basic, but upon playing the game you'll notice several aspects that make it stand out. The first has to be the facial animations that everyone possesses. Throughout the narrative they add an extra dimension to the script and help portray the emotions of each character that really helps draw players in. Secondly, the environments look stunning. Although some have the potential to become quite repetitive when in dungeons, it's mainly in the city where they begin to shine. For example, the Apple Market looks like a real marketplace, with various shops that have glass windows, signs and other subtle details that bring the location to life. The same goes for the town square, with various buildings, roads and even cars that help it feel like a real and breathing environment. Lastly, the special effects take center stage when engaging in battle. Fireballs and lasers literally fill the screen and look stunning during motion. Like with many games that adopt this cel-shaded style, their visuals become somewhat timeless, and because of it, Mega Man Legends still looks incredible, even to this day. Whilst not very impressive by today's standards, Soul Reaver is one game that actually seems like it was able to stand the test of time, especially since games of the N64, PlayStation 1 era were the beginning of the 3D genre, and are most often perceived now to be extremely ugly. This is mostly because of the blocky characters and low resolution textures, but what still makes Soul Reaver so amazing is that even though it's dated, it still looks extremely good for a PlayStation game. The world of Nosgoth is an amazingly huge and detailed world, and it will amaze you that it's all being streamed from a CD with no loading times at all. The only downside to this is that in certain areas you'll notice some minor slowdown. This is especially noticeable playing the game in our current time, since we are used to generally perfect frame rates. The biggest problem with Soul Reaver that I had was that there was a lot of noticeable clipping problems with certain objects, also with the 3D rotating camera that can quite often cause tears on the screen, but all of this is generally forgettable. The sheer size and scope of the project, as well as all of the effects and animations that make up the gameplay, really help it stand out. Other than some of the minor annoyances, the visuals in Soul Reaver are absolutely exceptional. Here's hoping we receive another entry of this forgotten classic one day. Graphically, Parasite Eve 2 is one of the most beautiful games to ever be developed for the PlayStation. As with the original game, the sequel features plenty of FMV sequences, with the technology having been improved substantially from the last game. The FMVs are all drawn in much better detail because of it. During gameplay, Parasite Eve 2 uses polygonal characters on pre-rendered backgrounds, pretty much the same way the Resident Evil series has been doing it as well. The game no longer used the large maps in the original, and instead offered smaller but a lot more detailed environments for the player to traverse. And this is where Parasite Eve 2 really shines. The amount of detail packed into each map is staggering and adds a hefty weight of realism to each environment. Although facial features are still poor, Aya's animation is now completely smooth when she's running around or performing actions. It's not going to blow anyone away by today's standards, but when taking into account the age of the PlayStation, it's really impressive what they achieved. Well, that does it for today's video. Don't forget to hit subscribe and follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos and to take part in giveaways. You can also join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters as well, Rhino, Skilljim, Nano, Steve and Paddy J, for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you in the next one.